Okay, hi everyone. So this is the second video in our car setup series for Aldershot Model Car Club, and the aim of this is to help people get up to speed quicker if you're new to racing or struggling with car setup, just to help get you competitive quicker so you can enjoy racing. So I'm only in my, I've just finished my second season, so I'm quite new, but I made a lot of mistakes and learned a few things, so I just want to share that with you. So last time we did pre-setup, so in this video we're going to look at suspension setup, and I'm just going to talk you through very quickly some of the different things you can adjust on your car and what kind of effect they might have on the car's handling. And we're going to go through some of the different ways you can check the car's suspension settings and how they work, and some of the benefits of doing that. So what I'm going to do first, so if you come in close, I'm going to just explain what we're going to look at today. So we're going to go through front and rear shocks, springs, damper oil, and the shock lean angle here. So what effect that has, front, rear. We're going to go through roll center adjustments here and how you can change those and what effect they have. Roll bars, front and rear, or stabilizers as they call them sometimes in the manual. Going to talk a little bit about weight distribution. You can see some balanced weights here. How do you do that? What does it do? What's the point? We're also just going to talk a little bit about how you check the preload on the shock absorbers, and different ways to do that, ride height, camber, all that stuff. So let's make a start by just talking about the springs very quickly. So on this car, this is set up for Aldershot, and on this car, which is an X-Ray X4, I've got 2.7 springs at the rear and progressive 2.5 to 2.8 springs on the front. So what that means is that on the front springs, they're initially a little bit softer, 2.5, but as they go through their travel, they get harder. So that makes the car a little bit easier to drive, because softer springs just make the car slightly less twitchy, but it means that it still digs into the corner and you get some traction when the car's got a little bit of roll. So generally speaking, if you have harder springs on the car, front or rear, that's going to put more load on the tires, it's going to put more pressure on the road, and it will generally increase traction. But then at the same time, if you're on a bumpy track, you don't want the springs too hard, because then they won't absorb the bumps in the track. So damper oil, also that's something you can change to have an effect on the car. On this car I've got 350 in the rear and the front. Most people use anything between sort of 300 and 400 for Aldershot. In the winter you might want to go a little bit lighter because it's colder and the oil is more viscous. When it's warm in the summer, you might go for heavier oil, because when the oil heats up it gets thinner. Damping also has an effect on the car's handling, generally speaking, if you've got thicker damper oil, again like with the springs, that's going to put more pressure through the tires, give you more traction, make it more responsive, but at the same time it's going to make it a little bit more difficult over the bumps. So you've just got to try these things and see what works for you. If you have a modern touring car, certainly starting with 2.7 springs on the rear and on the front is not a bad way to go. Okay, so let's talk about the shock angle. So on most cars you can adjust the lay down angle at the top of the shocks. Now what that's doing is the more inclined they are, effectively you're making the shocks softer. So you can see here on the X4 they're laid down front and rear, so that's quite a soft setting. one thing you can do to increase traction on the rear, if you're struggling for traction on the rear, is stand up the shocks and make them a little bit more upright, and that will put more pressure on the tyres and give you more traction. But for some strange reason on all the X4 setups, I never see anyone standing the shocks up. But so I've kept mine down like this, but one of these days I should try standing them up, but I haven't done that yet. Okay, so that's a little bit about the shocks. What I'm going to do now is just take you through the ride height settings, and I'll show you how to adjust that. Okay, so let's look at the car ride height. So whenever you're checking the ride height settings, it's important that the car's got all the weight in it. So we've got the battery here, all the other stuff there. So other than the body shell, the car is at its race weight. So we've also got the tyres on here. So these are race tyres. The tyres do vary a little bit in diameter. So always best to set up the ride height of the car with the tyres you think you're going to use on race day. So for checking the ride height, I've got this ride height gauge here. So this is an MR33 gauge, quite nice. You can see it's progressive, 0.2 millimeter steps here, and then you've got 0.2 here, but you can go up in 0.1 stages by using this gauge. So okay, so what does ride height do? So having a higher ride height will generate more roll in the car, and on a low traction track such as Aldershot can actually help just generate a bit more traction. It also helps over bumps, stops the car bottoming out, and you know, but at the same time, when you've got higher ride height, the center of gravity of the car is higher, and that's going to make the car a little bit less responsive. So it's getting the balance right between generating traction, not skipping over the bumps, and keeping the car as low as reasonably possible so it's fast around the corners. So another general principle is that you tend to have a split between the rear ride height and the front. So normally the rear of the car is about 0.2 millimeters higher ride height than the front. That's what I aim to do with this car. So the setup I've been using on this car recently is 6 millimeter ride height at the rear and 5.8 ride height at the front. So I'm going to show you now how you check that, and we'll just use this gauge here to see where we're at. So if you measure it here, so make sure the car's kind of compressed, and let's see what we've got. So you can see here the 6 is sliding under, so we're a little bit high there. So we're just going to unload this shock. So we're going to turn it anti-clockwise with the collar here until we're right on 6 millimeters. Another fraction more. It's not far out, but not quite there. Okay, that's about right. Now we check the other side. That's a little bit low, so this one needs to come up slightly. Okay, that's good. Then we're going to check the front. So we're going for 5.8 millimeters on the front, and you measure normally just here behind the front suspension arm. So what we got a little bit high on this side, so let's undo this slightly. Got a bit too far. Okay, that's good that side. One more side to do. A little bit low. So when it's low, you turn the collar clockwise when you're looking on the top, just to give it a little bit more preload. A bit more. Okay, so we're all done. We've got 6 millimeter ground clearance at the rear, 5.8 millimeters at the front, which is what I want it to be. So what we're going to do now is get the car on the scales and just see how the balance of the car is on the corner weights, because you can make slight adjustments with the shock collars to change the preload just to help balance the car a little bit. So I'm going to set up the scales and I'll show you how that works. Okay, let's take you through camber settings quickly. So I've got the car on the setup station here so we can check the camber angles on each of the four corners. But what I want to do first is just tell you quickly about why you need to change camber. So if you look at these tyres here, neutral camber or zero camber is tyres just directly vertical like this. If they're pointing slightly inwards at the top, that's called negative camber, and pointing out at the top is positive camber. So on touring cars, normally you have about 2 degrees negative camber at the front and at the rear. But sometimes you might want to change that to up to 3 degrees or maybe just slightly under 2. But that tends to be where the adjustment is. So it's round about 2. And the reason why you adjust camber is that when the car is going around a corner, so if this is the outside wheel, as the tyre is loaded up, if there's zero camber on the suspension, the pressure point of the tyre will be on the outside here. So if we lean the tyre in with camber like this, what that means is as the tyre is loaded up round the corner, the pressure point is more towards the centre of the tyre, and that's what you want to get maximum traction. So that's why you adjust camber. And if you look at this setup station here, if you go around the front, you can see it's really easy to see exactly what camber you've got. So you can see there I've got just slightly under 2 on the front on that side, and same with this side. So to adjust that on this car, what you do is you get an Allen key, just turn that very carefully, which changes the length of this top arm. I'm just going to tweak it until it's right on 2. That one's good. And let's do the other side. Going the wrong way. Let's go that way. Okay, there you go. So that's all set perfectly. That's 2. The rear is 2 as well. On some cars, you might need a turnbuckle wrench. So that's one of these. These are really useful to have. So you can see on this car, it's got turnbuckles. So to adjust the camber, you use the wrench like this just to change the dimension. So this car, this an automatic. So like with the Schumacher MI7 and MI8, these cars have top suspension arms which enable you not only to adjust the camber, but you can change the caster angle as well by adjusting these 2 arms differently. To measure that, what you have is these little gauges here, which you screw onto the top of the hubs there. They stick through here, and they indicate the caster angle of the front and the rear. And the caster angle is the angle of the suspension arms relative to the road. So normally on the front you have about 4 degrees tilted back like this, and the rear is normally pretty much neutral. On this car, you can't actually change the caster angle unless you have different height shims at the front and the rear of the suspension arms. But on this car, you can do it really easily by changing the turnbuckles. So that's all on camber. Let's go to the next step. Right, let's have a look at the corner weight system. So we're going to turn the scales on and just see how the car is balanced on each corner with these scales. So rest it and then just compress it slightly. Okay, so we've got a little bit too much on the right rear, a little bit too much on the left front. So what we're going to do is just take a little bit of pressure off the right rear by turning this collar anti-clockwise, and then I'm just going to increase this one a bit by turning it clockwise and see how that changes things. So that's closer. We've got that to within about 6 grams or so. That's close enough for me. Let's have a look at the front. We've got 310 on the front left, 304 on the front right. That's good enough for me. Okay, so we've done the ride height. The weight balance is pretty good. Let's have a look at one more check that you might do, which is with this tweak station, which again, it's another way of just checking the loading on the corners. Now, what I've found with this is that if you set the car up on the corner weights and then set it up on the tweak station, it's difficult to get a setup which works on both. You tend to go from one to the other, back to the other, back to the other one. You go around in circles all night trying to keep both of these happy. So what I'd recommend is you choose one way to check the loading of the car on each 4 corners, and just stick with that. So let me show you how this tweak station works. So you set the car on here. Normally I do it with these setup wheels, but I'm just going to leave these tyres on just to show you how it works. So how this works, if you come around here then. Okay, so how this works is there's a little spirit level there, and this measures the loading on this corner of the car. Now, the bubble is to the left, which means that there's a little bit too much pressure on this wheel compared to that one, which would suggest that this shock absorber here has too much preload on, and it's putting too much force on this corner of the car. So what you would do to level that out is loosen off this shock collar a bit until the bubble on the spirit level goes to the middle. But I'm not going to make any changes now because I'm happy with how I've set it up here, but I'm just showing you in case you want to do this method. So you do that on the front, and then what you do is you swap the car around and you do the same on the rear. You make sure it's centered, and you can see here that again there's too much pressure on this corner. So what you would do is loosen off this shock collar here, and that'll take some preload off here, take some load off here, and just level the car out. Okay, so that's how the tweak station works. There's another way you can do this, which doesn't involve any overpriced hoodie equipment. I'll show you how this works. So if you set the car on a flat surface like this, take a wrench, and if you look at the underside of the car, you can see there's a little hole here which is exactly in the center of the chassis. So what we're going to do is use this to lift up the car and just check how the rear tires lift off the surface to check the balance of the car. So let's get the wrench here and just locate it in that little hole. Okay, so we lift off the car, and what we're looking for is which tire leaves the board first. So I'm lifting up very carefully. Pretty much the same. So that's all good. Check the front. Like with the rear, there's a little hole there which is designed for using balancing tools and doing this kind of check. So we just check the front. So I'll just locate this wrench here, compress the suspension. So we're just lifting it up slowly,
We're just checking which tyre leaves first.
This side is lifting up very, very slightly before this side. So what that would mean is I need a little bit extra preload on this corner of the car. So you adjust that until the wheels are both lifting off at the same time. So that's a nice easy way you can do it. So all you need to do really, if you don't have corner weights and you don't have one of these things, that's absolutely fine. You check the ride height of your car, and then you can use a wrench and a flat surface just to check the corner balance of the car, and you can get it pretty well spot on. So that's a nice easy method. Okay, so what we're going to look at next just quickly is roll center adjustments, and I'll just explain a little bit about what they do and the effect it has on the handling and how you can change those. So if you bring the camera in a little bit, so on this car you can see here I've got some shims underneath the rear suspension arms. So I'm pretty sure that's a 3mm shim. I'll just check with my vernier. No, it's a 2mm. Okay, so I've got 2mm shims underneath the rear suspension arms. I've got I can't remember which. Again, I've got the same 2mm shims under the front suspension arms. Now, the more shims you put under the suspension arms here, the higher the roll center of the car is going to be. Now, in a later video, I'm going to explain what roll center is and how you calculate it and what it means compared to center of gravity. But essentially, the roll center of the car, by adjusting these shims, adjust how the car rolls into the corners. So if you have a higher roll center, so more shims under here, the car's not going to roll so much. So the tires are going to get traction quicker and the car's going to be more responsive. So same with the front. So if your car is not very responsive, you can raise up the roll center on the front. That should give you a little bit more initial traction and steering, and just make the car more responsive generally. So with roll center adjustments, how it works is the adjustment on the lower arms has a much bigger effect than adjustment on the top arms. So if you want to increase the roll center, you add shims on the bottom, but take them away on the top. But get the bottom shims done first, and then use the top as fine tuning. So that's generally how it works. So, but we'll go into that in more detail in a later video. So another thing we're going to just talk about quickly now is the roll bars. So we've got roll bars, or stabilizers, you might call them, front and rear. So the effect of these is to adjust the car's responsiveness and levels of traction. So on this car I've got quite thin roll bars, and that makes the car roll a little bit more, which is probably better for a low traction circuit. If you go thicker roll bars, that will make the car get traction initially a little bit quicker, but the thing to do is just to experiment, try different thickness roll bars, but only change them one at a time. So try a different thickness on the front, don't change the front and rear at the same time, and just try them, see how the car behaves, and go from there. Okay, so final thing I'm just going to talk about quickly now is weight distribution. So you can see here on this car I've got some balance weights which not only do they bring the car up to the legal weight, which is 13-20 grams for touring cars, but also by the position of these balance weights you can change the behavior of the car. So when we had the car on the corner weights, I had 51% rear weight distribution, 49% at the front. So what does changing the weight distribution do to the car? So you might think that adding weight on the front of the car is going to put more pressure on the front tyres and help get you traction. But actually the opposite is true. The more weight you add to the front or the rear of the car, the effect of adding that weight is to make the car less responsive. So if you put weight on at the rear of the car, you're going to make the rear end of the car quite lively. It's going to be harder to drive, but you know, that might help you get steering, and by changing the weight location you can affect the car. So I've got some very small 5 gram weights here on the front, and what I found is that just settles the car down a bit on the fast sweeper we've got Aldershot, and just makes it a little bit easier to drive. But if you have too much weight on the front, you're going to get understeer, and that's just going to slow down your lap time. So the thing to do with weight distribution, if your car is underweight without any balance weights on, just use the positioning of the weights to affect the setup of the car, and you know, just make it, you need it responsive, but you don't want to be flying off every corner either. So just experiment with that and see how you get on. But the thing to remember is, if you're going to change the roll center, just change that rear and front separately, one thing at a time. So adjust the rear, try it, adjust the front, try it. If you're going to change the springs, don't change anything else. Change the springs at the rear, try it. Change them at the front, try it. Same with the roll bars. And once you think you've got those sorted out, you know, try changing the location of these balance weights just to see how the car behaves. So that's it for this video. Hope that was helpful. We've got some more detailed setup theory coming in a later video. I'm going to go into the geometry of roll center in a bit more detail, but I hope that was helpful, and look forward to the next video. Thanks.